The Hauptmann was quiet for a moment. "Well," he finally asked, "what does it mean?" Franz took a careful breath and prayed for courage as he did so. "Herr Hauptmann," he said, "the only conclusion a Bible student can come to is that the Fuhrer cannot win this war. It will not be possible for him to unite Europe under his leadership and establish his 1,000-year Reich." He looked earnestly into the Hauptmann's face. "Sir, the Bible's predictions have been proven accurate again and again. And if they're accurate here, it means that we're fighting a losing battle." Dead silence. Finally, the Hauptmann glanced at his watch. "Heavens, it's noon. We need to hurry, otherwise we'll get nothing to eat. Where's the time gone?" He stood up, and the others instantly rose in respect. "Hassel?" "Yes, Herr Hauptmann." "Could I borrow your Bible for a few days?" "Certainly, sir. I have another copy in my room. Here, just let me remove my notes. Keep it as long as you like." In a daze, the men left the Hauptmann's quarters. Lieutenant Gottschalk carefully avoided eye contact with Franz. A week later, the Hauptmann returned the Bible. "Hassel," he said, "I appreciate what you shared with me." He looked around and lowered his voice. "From now on, we will no longer operate a third of our motorized vehicles. The gasoline rations thus saved, I want you to store in drums and canisters, so when the end comes, we'll have enough fuel to get back home." "Yes, sir. And remember, Hassel, this is just between you and me." That's the end of chapter 14. The 3.5-hour Bible study.
But I like the way he
How's this
manipulated
left,
him
huh?
into being an expert.
Oh yeah, well,
On
he's a history
history.
professor. That's a good idea.
It was interesting.
Great technique.
Just, I think that's the main main point of that particular chapter. That anywhere, at any time, God can open up an opportunity, right? I remember when we went to on one of our trips over to Turkey. We were invited to participate with National Geographic in a documentary on Noah's Ark. And so I can remember when we were over there with the film crew, we were waiting to go to dinner, and we were sitting in the hotel lobby. We all, came out of our rooms, met in the hotel lobby, and while we were sitting there waiting for our guide to come to take us for dinner, one of the fellows on the crew, he said, "So, what's all this talk I hear in the Bible about the second coming of Jesus?" Now here we are. This film crew is, to be honest with you, nice professional people. I mean, really experts in their own field. There was a sound engineer there. There was a production person there. There was a person that just actually did the filming and whatnot. And then there was like a gopher. So there were like four. It was a crew of 4 people. And I don't believe any of them could have ever. I don't think they could have told you where the book of Genesis was in the Bible.
Jeremy, are we getting volume on the stream?
Should be now, yeah. It was.
Okay.
It was I forgot to switch the mic on for
Oh.
the first little bit there.
I had a message where Dan said, "You're going to have to reread the story."
Uh,
I hope it got picked up on the recording though, right?
I don't know.
All right, if it didn't, we'll have
Yeah,
to
we'll
figure out
have
a
to
way to redo the story for them. Sorry about
layering
that.
that in. Well, anyway, we were in the hotel lobby, and one of the guys just said, "What's this about the second coming of Jesus?" So here, there in the hotel lobby, unexpectedly, we had a Bible study, and interestingly enough, it was like a 45-minute wait that we had for our guide to come. So we all sat around in the hotel lobby having a Bible study with the crew, and so that was kind of neat. But I can remember we were referencing some of the quotes in the book of Daniel, where the stone cut out without hands, hits the image and so forth.
Did you get you some tea?
I don't know. It's
I think hot tea would help any.
probably not. But Elijah's here. He can lead out.
If you'd like to.
Just so happens that I didn't prepare a thing.
That's the best time. But anyway,
There's a saying after. That's when the Spirit can really lead.
that's right, exactly.
Dad's having a really hard time with his allergies the last couple of days. Yesterday was a real kicker.
Today, and I was up early this morning. And anyway,
We're still in Matthew 26.
no, we
27.
have gone to 27. Maybe what we can do is get that open and
You can let us take turns reading it. We
right,
don't have to do as much talking.
good idea.
You can commentate.
Better than potentating.
Right.
Somebody tell me where we left off there. What did we talk about last week, just to kind of bring us in?
The
So
law,
chapter
Peter's
27.
denial, Christ.
all the laws they broke.
Okay, so the trial, if you want to call it that, really, they pretty much were in violation of all of their jurisprudent structure and system. They were doing some preliminary things to try to set the stage for the quote official procedure that they were going to go through. And of course, a lot of that was being done at night, which was not only not part of their law, but it was illegal. So, really, what did all of that trial that they went through, what did that really display?
Number one, fear.
Okay, it displayed fear. What else?
I think satanic influence.
Hatred.
Yeah, hatred was the word I was really looking for. And that hatred had really begun even during the time of his birth. Remember we talked when he was born that they wouldn't even go down there to say, oh yeah, it could be the Messiah, you know. So that had just festered for 3 decades. And now finally, here's Jesus in front of them, a rabbi. And by all accounts, but he was a rabbi that was what? In competition for the admiration and loyalty of the people. And you know, if anybody's ever been in a job situation where 2 people are vying for a promotion, you know, it can really become somewhat competitive. And can even become dangerous to some extent because you know, people wanting to move up the corporate ladder or to get promoted for greater benefits and so forth. And so Jesus was considered the competition. And man, here was an opportunity to get rid of the competition. And they were not going to, because of any kind of technicality, they were not going to let that escape this time, because it had done so many times before. I don't know if you recognize that when you read through the Gospels, there were a number of times where they thought they had him where they wanted him, and yet a way of escape would be made, and he would escape, so to speak. And they were afraid that this might be the case again, and they were just not going to let that happen. Let's go ahead and read through chapter 27. Maybe we can just have people take turns in doing this, so I don't have to read, because I'm sure it doesn't sound the best, especially on the video, on the tape.
We don't use tape anymore.
Or the digital.
You're showing your age, dear.
The digital age, yeah.
Yeah, on the 8-track.
On the 8-track, yeah. On those 45s. Nice to have Elijah back with us. I guess Elza's still snoozing.
Yeah.
It's a long trip back.
Yeah.
Just escaped from the hurricane in Texas.
Yeah, I was telling you, I was like, wow, we're just getting out of here just in time, aren't we?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
We went through a little bit of rain, but that was about it.
Hope everybody down there is going to be okay.
Said 300,000 were without electricity this morning.
So Rose, do you want to start? And then we'll let Larry do some reading, and Elijah can do some
How
reading.
much you'll be to read the first 6 verses or something? Right. do we want to stop at a certain point?
Maybe first 13 verses.
Oh, okay.
Nice.
Good number, right? When the morning was come, all the chief priests and elders of the people took counsel against Jesus to put him to death. And when they had bound him, they led him away and delivered him to Pontius Pilate, the governor. Then Judas, which had betrayed him, when he saw that he was condemned, repented himself and brought again the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders, saying, I have sinned in that I have betrayed the innocent blood. And they said, What's that to us? See thou to that. I guess that's the Hebrew version of, it's your problem, not ours.
Why do I care?
And he cast down the pieces of silver in the temple and departed and went and hanged himself. And the chief priest took the silver pieces and said, It is not lawful for us to put them into the treasury, because it is the price of blood. And they took counsel and bought with them the potter's field to bury strangers in. Wherefore that field was called the field of blood unto this day. Then was fulfilled that which was spoken by Jeremiah the prophet, saying, And they took the 30 pieces of silver, the price of him that was valued, whom they of the children of Israel did value, and they gave them for the potter's field, as the Lord appointed me.
Okay.
I mean, since that goes into Pilate and the governors, let's stop there and talk about the first part.
Yeah. Exactly.
What an odd thing.
Yeah. So,
What it
Says
did,
here-
though, is it made a public statement that the Jews had bribed him to turn Jesus in. So that actually created another chain of evidence that they had conspired in the whole thing.
right. It just says in my version here, when morning came, all. Did your Bible say all? A-double-L?
All the chief priests and elders, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, all the chief
That
priests
wasn't correct.
of the people plotted against, all that were there.
All that was there.
Right.
But Nicodemus and
Well, it also adds in mind.
Joseph of Arimathea.
It also
Okay.
has in mind like all the chief priests and elders of the people. I don't know if that
Sure.
like the crowds that were just around or.
Well, you got to remember, though, they had his trial at night, which was against the law.
Yeah.
So they would not have included the Pharisees that would have been sticklers for the legal end of things.
Well, not only
So they
that.
probably just didn't invite those that they knew would be against them.
When it came to execution, they were supposed to wait a full night and pray and fast before you finalized your decision the next day. So they were doing it right in the morning. Just they didn't
Exactly.
take the night to fast and pray.
Right, because the next day was going to be preparation day.
Violated every legal principle of their government. in
And the
order to
preparation
convict him.
day was they
Except
were not
for
allowed.
accepting the silver back for
Yeah.
profit.
Right, because they said it was not lawful.
Right? They hear that all this
Can't-
nonsense.
Can't use it for that.
It was perfectly fine for them to do an illegal trial and condemn a man to death, but taking the 30 pieces of silver and sticking it back in the treasury, now that's not lawful.
Well, that goes to show that in their minds, they still must have felt like they were doing the right thing in some way. Like, you know, like this is what needed to happen.
Even Judas, I think I had read, thought that he was promoting God's plan in giving Jesus up. That he was.
This is little.
Oh, okay. All of a sudden, light began to flash, and I'm thinking.
I know when I started watching it.
Either that or it's Jeremy Strong.
Yeah, let's talk about, since it starts here with Judas,
Doing that?
chapter 27 early here. You have to remember, too, that the Gospels are just giving us a little snippets, little summary of their perspective of things. And Matthew obviously thinks that it's significant to add a little insight here about Judas. But like any other scenario, it would be easy to get a one-sided perspective of Judas. You know, Judas was a scoundrel. He betrayed his Lord, etc., etc. You know, what an evil guy. And yet, Jesus never condemned him for what he had done. Right?
Now he said it'd be better for a millstone to be tied around his neck and cast into the lake than to see the Son of Man.
Right, but that's the report that we find after the fact.
Right.
But of course, the reason I'm saying that is because he was like the rest of the disciples. He was trying to prepare all of them for what was going to come, and he had compassion on the things that they were going to be dealing with. And he dealt with Judas as an individual, wanting what was best for him in his salvation. So he ventured long. This is getting difficult with Judas.
Well, I'm going to go back to what you said. You know, Judas was trying to force Christ in to becoming king. He was actually trying to force Christ's hand. But on the other hand, he figured, well, I might as well make a few dollars at it while I'm at it. You know.
Right, and of course it's
It's
always...
not that it's not that Judas wanted Christ crucified. Judas did not want him crucified.
No.
He thought he was going to be the Messiah who was
Yeah.
going to die.
And he'd have a prominent position.
Right, so because of, as we've mentioned, because of an incorrect...
Misunderstanding.
Because of an incorrect understanding of what would play out with the Messiah. He was structuring his responses in that regard, and so.
About the silver that he gave for, about them not taking the silver back in the treasury. Could that have been because that would have been like a record stating that they had bribed somebody for Jesus?
Well, actually, it was blood money.
Yeah.
You couldn't use blood money.
It was just part of the law.
Couldn't be in the temple.
Well, I get what you're saying.
Part
You're
of the
saying
law they
that
still
if
can.
It would have been an open record that they bribed to get Jesus taken in.
it couldn't write it off.
There's a chapter in Desire of Ages on Judas, chapter 76. Starts out by saying the history of Judas presents the sad ending of a life that might have been honored of God. Okay. In other words, it could have went the other way as well. And so that tells us that every person, even the disciples, they had choices to make in life, right? Choices to make. It could have went the other way as well. Now, 30 pieces of silver, what's significant about that? Anything?
A slave, cost of a slave.
Cost of a slave. Okay. So, and so, you know, for the Jews, that was highly symbolic. You know, they didn't regard Jesus as Messiah, of course, and they saw him as competition. I mean, you would think, I mean, they were well aware of all the good things that he was doing, the things that they weren't doing, right?
But they were keeping the law.
But they were keeping the law.
I think you have a very stark contrast that comes to light as you read on, that it really parallels the difference between people. You know, like you've got Judas and Peter, who are both kind of prominent disciple figures here that did the wrong thing. But Judas's response was much more dramatic and self-torturing. So he went and killed himself thinking, how could I possibly ever repent? You know, I just led the Messiah to his death, you know. And Peter, I guess a bit less severe in that sense, except that he had denied the person he was just proclaiming he was going to never deny, even on point of death. But, you know, Peter later on makes it come about and completely devotes himself to the point of death. And Judas, you know, took the other way out.
I think that we have a slight misconception, being Gentiles, because this was a Jewish book written by Jewish people for Jewish people, and we don't perceive it exactly as they did.
Everybody that would come to Christ comes with baggage. When you are converted, you have a past, don't you? And for, as Elijah's bringing out, you know, once you are converted, sometimes that past will come back to haunt you. Right? That's when the warfare in the life of a Christian begins. It's that struggle between the natural man and the converted man. Okay? And Judas had some baggage. And Judas was kind of an entrepreneurial type of figure. He had a strong desire and love for money. He was the first century businessman. And a lot of times in business, people will do things that would be considered unethical to the average person. But in business, that person would say, well, you just have to be shrewd. You know, you have to be cunning. You have to be, you know, a step ahead of your competition.
This is just business.
It's just business. Nothing personal, right? Which is kind of
Judas-
ludicrous.
Judas is also the only individual of the 12 that asked to become one of the apostles, the disciples.
It says Judas had naturally a strong love for money, but he had not always been corrupt enough to do such a deed as what he had done. He had fostered the evil spirits of avarice until it had become the ruling motive of his life. The love of mammon, or money, overbalanced his love for Christ. Through becoming the slave of one vice, he gave himself to Satan to be driven to any length in sin. But he rationalized and convinced himself along the way that he was doing something that would ultimately benefit the entire group and the church overall. Okay? He saw this, he looked at the church from a corporate mentality perspective. You know, this was a new, young, upstart organization. I mean, he believed in what they were doing. He believed in the cause. and he wanted to be a part of it. But he thought, from a business perspective,
You need to take it to the next level.
it has to, to take it to the next level, we have to implement certain little protocols and things, etc., etc. And so this is why he made some of the choices and decisions. He was looking at it strictly as a corporation or a business, the way business people look at things, you know. So he was very analytical. He was analytical of Christ, the things that were being taught, the response that they were getting from not only the people, which was very positive, but also the response that they were getting from the Jewish leaders. And he was thinking, how can we make this more profitable? How can we get to the place where the organization needs to be, but also where I need to be? Okay? So again, he had that, and that's the way any business person would look at. You know, a business is like a baby, a birth. And you know, how can I get this thing to mature to the place where it makes me comfortable? That was his motive. That was his intention, right? Excuse me. Thus, Judas. Now, as he analyzed the things that the disciples were saying and doing, he summed up all the disciples and flattered himself that the church would often be brought into perplexity and embarrassment if it were not for his ability as a manager. So he was definitely, and the disciples, you know, who were they? They were people that were fishermen, uneducated largely. Luke, of course, was a physician, but
But he wasn't one of them.
Judas, when Judas came into the equation, he said, "Man, I can really take this group to the next level."
And mold them, shape them.
And you know, they've got to trust me, right? And so forth.
And they did because he carried the money bag.
And he was talented, and he became a treasurer because of his business connections and so forth. Now, if you read behind the scenes, you'll find that there were some issues with him being the treasurer. Okay, yeah, he would always feel a little justified when the little bits of monies and resources came in. He would always feel justified in saying, "Hey, you know, as a managerial fee, and for doing what I'm really doing, carrying the group, so to speak, you know, I need to have a little compensation for that." And so he would help himself. You know, Jesus was aware of this, but he never really called him on it. You know, he never called him in and said, "Hey, what are you doing? You know, we're all part of what's in one group here." You know,
Fired.
huh?
You're fired.
You're fired. He didn't do that. So he was blinded by his own weakness of character, but Christ placed him where he would have an opportunity to see and correct these deficiencies.
But
That's what he does, right? That's what Jesus would always do.
did he also put him in the position to where he knew what he was going to do by betraying him? In other words, Judas was going to do his will, whether he knew he was or not.
Well, see, now that becomes a very interesting question. Because was Judas the one responsible for Christ being crucified?
No, it was the leadership.
Well, now, yeah, actually...
If there hadn't been a Judas,
But, yeah, there had to be a Judas in order for this to be accomplished.
if there hadn't been a,
It can be.
if there hadn't been a Judas, would Jesus have been crucified?
No.
You say no?
I think the Lord could have found another way. I mean, because they wanted to kill him regardless. And even if there wasn't a Judas, you know, he may have orchestrated it in such a way where he would have been somewhere else where they would have known where he was.
I think a couple of weeks ago I asked the question, was Judas even necessary? I mean, think about it. They for years now, we're talking 2.5 years, 3 years, almost 3.5 years by this time. They were well aware of who Jesus was.
Sure.
They knew his habits, they knew where he would be, they knew his routine. And there were opportunities that they tried to take, like I mentioned earlier, that he escaped.
But again, too, it wasn't on the timetable.
Well, they didn't know that, though.
Right.
The Jews had no concept that Jesus was the Passover lamb.
Right.
That
And
was
that he has his own timetable.
okay. So that wouldn't have never entered their thinking.
No.
But like coming back to our question then, why why the whole thing with Judas? Why did that? I mean, what if Judas had gone the other way? What if he had, because of these circumstances and opportunities that Christ was presenting, the light bulb went off and he said, "Man, what am I doing? I need to really get on board here. It's not about me. It's about the mission of and he is the Messiah." Now, that question probably he probably never thought through, because he had been taught like the rest of them, that the Messiah would set up a temporal kingdom. The Romans would be chased out. There'd be this temporal kingdom set up where he would be a part of the cabinet, so to speak, in this new government. And so that was his thinking, his upbringing, I'm sure, like the rest of them. He wasn't thinking the Messiah needs to be the lamb, needs to give his life. And then, of course, where's that going to leave us?
Well,
he wasn't thinking that way. But again, back to your question, if Judas had went the other direction, would Christ have been crucified?
but it couldn't have happened because Christ had already looked down the telescope of time. He did not make Judas do anything. He already saw what Judas was going to do, and he used that in order to get from point A to point B.
But I'm saying, was that necessary?
Yes.
You think it was necessary? What do you say, Elijah?
Don't be disagreeing.
I honestly, I think he played an essential part. But I think that, because then it sounds like God took away Judas's free will to change.
No. He had looked
he
down the
knew.
telescope of time and saw what was going to happen.
When
Yeah,
Judas...
But I don't think he needed Judas for it to be successful.
Question. Why would Judas go to the garden and say to the priests and the people that were with him who hated Jesus, "It's the person that I kiss, that I greet with a kiss, that's the one you need to arrest"? Why would he need to do that?
He wasn't, because Christ was
They-
in the temple every day.
I'm saying
Teaching.
they knew him, right? They knew him.
Well, maybe not exactly everybody that was with the greeting party. You know, I mean, he, from what I understand, he looked pretty common, and that's why he was able to slip into crowds really easily, because he didn't look outstanding.
But I can assure you, every guard that went there from the temple, because these guards was from the temple, I guarantee you, every one of them stood and listened to him teach.
Judas didn't need to point out the Messiah.
No.
He didn't need to say, "Oh, look, you don't know. This is the guy right here." They already knew who he was. Okay. Jesus had kind of a demeanor about him. There was kind of an atmosphere of peace and love and benevolence and so forth that just kind of, except on these occasions where we find him like in Gethsemane and places like that where he's struggling through certain things. But there was a reason why. What I'm getting to is there was a reason why Judas ended up greeting him that way and letting them know it's the guy that I kiss, you know. And it's because in the past, when the group had tried to arrest him or tried to take him, and they were unable to do so, Judas wanted to reassure them, and he believed that Jesus was 100% human. Okay, and he also had a question about whether he was, the Son of God or not. But I think the reason why this greeting and this touching was so that Judas could reassure the priests and the rabbis, if I can touch him and embrace him, you should be able to touch him as well and bind him. Okay? Because there was a little bit of a fear, I think, and Christ could have easily just walked away, right?
Well, there
He-
was a fear because
he allowed it.
whenever they asked who he was, he said, "I am he." They fell back as if dead men.
At the time of the Last Supper, let me take you back there with this paragraph here. Of course, in the commentary here, this is after Judas goes back and gives the money back, and he says, "I betrayed innocent blood," but the high priest, basically, said, "We don't care. That's your problem." Okay, that's pretty much what they said. It says, Judas now casts himself at the feet of Jesus. Now this is after that, right? He comes to a realization that he's done something totally inappropriate. He has, in other words, he's taken responsibility. What I'm getting to is that he's taken personal responsibility for taking Jesus down this course when, in reality, he wasn't even necessary for this to happen. I mean, this was going to happen regardless of whether Judas was involved or not. But Jesus is trying to teach Judas something along the way, just like he's trying to teach all of us, right? And unfortunately, Judas doesn't make the right choices. Okay, but after the fact now, Judas goes back after he tries to give the money back. He goes and he finds Jesus, because now he's looking for forgiveness, right? It says, now Judas cast himself at the feet of Jesus, acknowledging him to be the Son of God, and entreating him to deliver himself. See, he's like, oh, I've caused this, but you can walk away from this. You can get out of it. I know you can. So he's trying to save face and encourage Jesus to make this whole thing go away that he feels like he was responsible for. Okay, when in reality, Jesus has already told the group, "I'm going to be crucified." He didn't tell the group, "I'm going to be crucified because Judas is going to be the one to cause this." That wasn't the issue at all, really. It goes deeper than that. The Savior did not reproach his betrayer. He didn't say to Judas, "Oh, look, it's because of you that I'm in this situation." And yeah, you start, calling him names or whatever. He knew that Judas did not repent. His confession was forced from his guilty soul by an awful sense of condemnation and a looking for of judgment. But he felt no deep, heartbreaking grief that he had betrayed the spotless Son of God. Now, why would that be? Why did he really have any real regret from that?
He'd allowed himself to be more in love with money than...
He had allowed himself to believe that his decision to try to force Christ's hand was the right decision to make.
It seems like that was a relatively common...
thinking process. You had Peter who when God told him straight up what he would do, he said, "Oh no, Lord,
Well,
I don't know."
so he's trying to justify
His actions.
his action. He felt no deep, heartbreaking grief that he had betrayed the spotless Son of God and denied the Holy One of Israel. Yet Jesus spoke no words of condemnation. He looked pitifully upon Judas and said, "For this hour came I into the world." So Jesus goes back to the fact, basically he's saying to him, you didn't need to do what you ended up doing for me to end up at this place. This is why I came here in the first place. I've seen over the last 40 years of my involvement and association with the church that sometimes the decisions that the church has made, the church brethren have made, have been very similar to what Judas did here. Trying to force God to do something that it wasn't the right time, it wasn't the right place, etc., etc. Now, you know what I mean by that? In other words, by decisions and choices that we've made as an organization or a group, we've tried to kind of force God's hand. We see this even in our research work in the past, where other organizations have kind of broken into things and done certain things to try to force the issue when it wasn't maybe the right time for things to happen. And so that's what's kind of going on here. Now, there are other people that are watching this scene take place. It says, a murmur of surprise ran through the assembly. With amazement they beheld the forbearance of Christ toward his betrayer. Again, there swept over them the conviction that this man was more than mortal. But if he was the Son of God, they questioned, why did he not free himself from his bonds and triumph over his accusers? Judas saw that his entreaties were in vain, and he rushed from the hall, exclaiming, "It's too late, it's too late." He felt that he could not live to see Jesus crucified, and in despair he went out and he hanged himself. Again, he got to the place where he felt responsible for where Christ had come, not realizing that this was where he was supposed to be, despite any decision or choice that he ever made. So it's a sad commentary indeed on somebody. Jesus even said at one point, "Have I not yet chosen you 12, and yet one among you is a devil?" Meaning that there was somebody that was going to be kind of working against me. And that's what can happen even within Christian circles. People can be deceived into thinking they're doing a good thing, when in reality they're working against the cause of truth. And we have seen that firsthand with the research work that we're involved with. Here's God doing something marvelous and bringing to the forefront several archaeological sites that have been preserved over millennia. And what does church leadership do? Church leadership works against the very thing that God's trying to expose. And of course we don't have to get into all that, but I'm just saying that's the same scenario It's not difficult at all to get to a place where you're actually working against the cause of truth when you think or believe that you're working for the the promotion and benefit of God's message. All right, Elijah, you getting ready to do something, or can
No,
you?
no, I can read it. Stretching a little bit.
So you're picking it up in verse 15.
15?
Oh, well, actually, verse 11. Start
That's
from
technically
there.
11, but
Yeah. So Jesus ends up before the governor, right?
And Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, saying, Art thou the king of the Jews? And Jesus said unto him, Thou sayest. And when he was accused of the chief priests and elders, he answered nothing. Then said Pilate unto him, Hearest thou not how many things they witness against thee? And he answered him to never a word, insomuch that the governor marveled greatly. Now at that feast the governor was wont to release unto the people a prisoner whom they would. And they had been and they had then a notable prisoner called Barabbas. Therefore, when they were gathered together, Pilate said unto them, Whom will ye that I release unto you, Barabbas or Jesus, which is called Christ? For he knew that for envy they had delivered him. Should I continue on there? Yeah, okay. When he was set down on the judgment seat, his wife sent unto him, saying, Have thou nothing to do with that just man? For I have suffered many things this day in a dream because of him. But the chief priests and the elders persuaded the multitudes that they should ask Barabbas and destroy Jesus. The governor answered and said unto them, Whether of the twain will ye that I release unto you? They said, Barabbas. Pilate saith unto them, What shall I do then with Jesus, which is called Christ? They all say unto him, Let him be crucified. And the governor said, Why? What evil hath he done? But they cried out the more, saying, Let him be crucified. When Pilate saw that he would prevail nothing, but that rather a tumult was made, he took water and washed his hands before the multitude, saying, I am innocent of the blood of this just person. See ye to it. Should we stop there or continue on?
Just 2 more verses.
Okay. Then answered all the people and said, His blood be on us and on our children. Then released he Barabbas unto them. When he had scourged Jesus, he delivered him to be crucified.
Okay. Now, what Matthew doesn't bring out here is that, in this particular commentary, is that he was in front of Pilate, who was the governor, twice, right? In other words, he went to Pilate first, and then he went to Herod, and then he came back to Pilate. So all of that really, is what you just read,
Commentary of everything.
was part of all those little bits and pieces that had occurred over that period of time. What's really interesting to me is to see the difference between the Jews who were supposed to be, here the leaders, the Sanhedrin, the leaders of God's church. They were supposed to be looking out for the accused, right? They were trying to, they should have been trying to preserve the integrity and the life of the accused. I use that lightly because he really had never been accused of a particular crime. And yet the pagan secular government basically was like, we don't see any problem here with this guy. You've not shown us any evidence that there is an issue here. And so what was the response to that? When he first went to Pilate, and Pilate was like, all right, you've got me out of bed early in the morning, which he didn't appreciate. And of course, this was not the first time this had ever happened. And typically, the secular authorities would go along with the determination of the Jewish Sanhedrin because they knew that the Jewish Sanhedrin was supposedly try everything in their power to prevent the accused from being at this place of judgment. But in this case here, Pilate's mind is stirred, especially after getting the notification from his wife, right? So it's almost as if God... So was God trying to work behind the scenes to stop what was going to inevitably happen?
No.
No. So why do you think all this is taking place? You know, why does the Holy Spirit inspire his wife to have this dream?
I guess hopefully to change their hearts and minds over, course of time at least.
You know, what's impressive to me is that even in this situation, Christ is still trying to reach every soul that he comes in contact with. He's still trying to change every life that he comes in contact with. Even though he's under this false, these false accusations, so to speak.
Well, he's trying to change lives, but he wasn't trying to save his own.
Exactly. Okay. And how do you know that specifically?
Because, number one, like you said, everybody come in contact with, he tried to save them. And number two, he kept his mouth shut. And number three, he's on a time schedule. This time schedule cannot be broke.
Right. So he knows what the ultimate goal is, even though all the players and all the people around him, many of them have no clue. Right? Have no clue. All right. So he goes to Pilate first, right? And again, there's another chapter in here called in Pilate's Judgment Hall. It says Pilate looked at the men who had Jesus in charge, and then he gazed at Jesus himself, and he'd had to deal with all kinds of criminals, but never before had a man bearing marks of such goodness and nobility been brought before him. As I said before, Jesus was just his manner, the way he presented himself, the way he walked, the way he stood, his posture and his gestures and everything. You could tell this was not a criminal or a peasant, And he says, on his face he saw no sign of guilt, no expression of fear, no boldness or defiance. In other words, he wasn't, how dare they accuse me of, what's going on here? This is so irate. There was just none of that, right? No, he saw a man of calm and dignified bearing, whose countenance bore not the marks of a criminal, but the signature of heaven. I wonder, it makes me wonder if people see you under a normal circumstance, just out and about, what kind of picture is conjured up in their minds when people see you out and about? Do they say, that guy looks kind of shady, or do they say, wow, that person looks kind of like royalty? I mean,
Hopefully in the best possible way.
right.
Well,
Wow, he looks like royalty.
I used to have a poem that Mama gave me, and it said, I am my neighbor's Bible. The only thing they may see about Christ is what they see within you.
Right.
So, when someone looks to us, let's hope that they see Christ by our manner, the way we walk, the way we talk, everything.
Is that going to become really important and critical as we start to see
More
societal?
so, at the end, the closer we get, the stronger it's going to be.
In other words, this would have to be this circumstance here where you're being brought before secular rulers, people that have power to say you live or you die, and Pilate doesn't see any fear in this man. He sees a dignified person. Again, he's dealt with criminals before, and this person is definitely, you can tell this person is definitely not a criminal. So, as we approach the last days, and I do believe we're moving in that direction very quickly, will we be able to present the same demeanor?
Yes.
You know, society's falling down. People, you're being accused of things. You're being brought before rulers and whatnot because of your obstinance, right? Because of your convictions. You know, are you going to be able to? Are they going to be able to look at you and see the signature of heaven?
Yes, I think so.
I hope so. Yeah, I pray so.
Well, if you wasn't, you wouldn't be there to start with.
It says here that Christ's appearance made a favorable impression upon Pilate. I mean, he didn't have to say anything. Just the way that he stood, the way that the expression on his face made a very impressionable, very beneficial impression favorable upon Pilate. So immediately, Pilate's better nature is aroused. Now Pilate becomes the guy that says, this guy looks like he's worth saving. You know? I mean, there are some people you look at and you say, you know, you got a little question mark there. You know, is this somebody that needs to be a part of society? But Pilate could see that this guy was worth saving. He wasn't a criminal. And so what does he start to do? He starts to question, well, why have you brought this man here? You know, why have you brought this man here? Coco, go. Go lay down. All right, so now you have an issue between Pilate, the governor. Now you have an issue between the government and the church. And what's the response in this little scenario here? What's the response of the Jews who brought Jesus to them? What's the issue? I mean, what's their attitude
The
now?
people or the
What's the attitude of the Jews,
leaders?
the Jewish people, the Jewish leaders? What's their attitude now when they start to see the government, Pilate, saying, "This guy looks right. This guy's seems like this guy's not a criminal."
If you don't convict him, you're no friend of Caesar's.
They become outraged, and what is their attitude? What is their response to him when he says, "What's this guy doing here?" You know, I don't really see any problem with him. Why have you brought him here? You know, you've never even really made any official accusation against him. There's no, in other words, there wasn't a court ruling that condemned the man. And you know, here's all the evidence. And Pilate is saying, you haven't really brought any evidence. And so how did the Jews respond?
Either condemn him or we'll go to
Just trust us. You know, we wouldn't have got you out of bed early in the morning if this wasn't some major problem here. Just trust us.
not only that, but if you don't trust us, you're no friend of Caesar's and we'll take it to him.
And so the church is looking for the power of the state
To do their bidding.
to do their bidding. Where have we heard that before? Where have we heard this whole church-state thing coming together, right? And the church using the power of the state to condemn the innocent, the righteous.
As it will be at the end days.
You see the scenario playing out here, okay? So they're basically...
See what he went through is exactly what we're going to go through.
Yeah.
His is just a personal scale, ours is a worldwide scale.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what's happening.
And we're going to see the same things.
So they become irate that he would even question their assessment of the situation. And basically, it's, look, just trust us. You know, we know what we know what this guy's about, and we need to get. In other words, they are hell bent on getting rid of him, They know they can't do anything themselves, and so they're calling for the state to do their dirty work. Right? That's the only option that they really have. It says they had hoped, the Jewish leaders had hoped to impress Pilate with a sense of their importance, and thus lead him to accede to their request without going through many preliminarities. Okay. They were eager. They were eager to have their sentence ratified, for they knew that the people who had witnessed Christ's marvelous works could tell a very, very different story. They didn't want to get the people involved, because then that would be
A trial.
yeah. They could tell a very different story from the fabrication that they themselves were now rehearsing. So they didn't want it to go into this big public display of things, because then they would be exposed, right, for the fraudulent things that they were doing.
Well, you know, even though the general public itself, they followed their leaders simply because they trusted them.
Yeah. Well, anyway, Pilate finally realizes the scheme that's being played here, and he decides, I need to figure out a way to kind of get out of this a little bit. And so he says, oh, this is a Galilean. Oh, he needs to go over to the county seat over there. And who's over there? That's where Herod is, right? And so Pilate sends him over to Herod eventually. And Herod, it says, is kind of glad to see Jesus.
But he was glad only because he wanted to see miracles performed.
That's right, he wants to see the miracles performed. This is the same Herod that had John the Baptist beheaded. Okay? And so when Herod starts to hear the stories, when the government starts to hear the stories that unfold with the Messiah, they of course become curious, and Herod originally thinks that Jesus is the resurrected John the Baptist, right? So there's a little bit of fear and apprehension about that, but there's also that curiosity. And so when Jesus appears before him and he sees, this guy doesn't look very dangerous to me. And what happens in that encounter with Herod? What happens in the encounter with Herod? What's the striking thing that causes Herod to become kind of indignant with Jesus?
I want to say it's because he didn't show him any miracles or didn't answer any of his questions.
Right. He basically, Herod basically says to him, look here, guy, I can release you, and if you perform some miracles, I'll release you. But now, is that what Jesus needs? Is that what he wants?
No.
No, that's not. He knows that he's got to play the role of substitute, and he has to be the Passover lamb. So he doesn't want to be released. And so Herod becomes indignant that Jesus isn't
Well, he
cooperating.
actually probably does want released. But he knows he can't.
He can't. Okay. But eventually, he ends up going back to Pilate. It's just interesting when you read through here. Pilate had pretty much come to the place where he was going to let him go, but he was also. What's the indication here that he was kind of a weak-willed governor? There are lots of people in government positions that there's some that have strong characters and some that have weak characters. What was Pilate?
He's weak. He
He was
let
kinda
everybody
weak.
else tell him what to do.
Okay, so what's the evidence that he was kind of a weak-willed guy.
He went with the overall theme of the people rather than what he knew to be right. He didn't stand on principle. He didn't
stand on
want
principle.
to cause a fuss, so he
To try to keep the peace, so to speak.
better that one should die.
Yeah. So, when we look today at the things that develop, and when we see some of the demonstrations that go on, some of the rioting that goes on today, even in some of our own cities, when you look at the response from the government, you can tell that we're dealing with this very similar thing here. You've got some government leadership that are very weak, and all they want to do is try to keep the peace. But if you're somebody that's got a lot of money and you can hire people to be unruly, then in a sense you can control the action and the response from the government, can't you? And we've seen that play out here just recently in Charlotte and in other places around the country. But but the one very striking indication that this occurred here was when Pilate decides to have the accused, meaning Jesus. Now he's not been condemned of it. He's not been condemned of anything because there's been no real trial, right? And there's been no real evidence. And so here is the government taking action against somebody that has never been condemned. In other words, he's being sentenced without really due process. And what does he do to Jesus? He has him beaten. He has him, and he has him beaten and whipped to try to pacify the unruly crowd.
It's nothing personal, but I'm gonna have you beat up, and maybe we'll see if that'll lessen their anger.
Right. So, and again, Larry, like you're saying, these are the same kind of things that will play out at the end, where the government will say, well, if we just kind of beat up on these Christians a little bit, maybe that'll pacify the outcry against them, that kind of thing. Maybe the crowd will become sympathetic from their suffering. Is that ever going to be the case?
No.
No.
But I mean, in terms of his thinking, it wouldn't have been a bad tactic if it was one of their own, because then they would have, why would you want the Romans persecuting one of your own people?
Right. Pilate started to think things like this because they would ask him questions and Jesus would remain silent. He says, does this man disagree? Or does this man disregard the proceedings because he does not care to save his life? See, he started to think and understand that he could easily speak up here and say something. He could easily respond here and say something that would give me then the authority to say, I free you, you can go. But by remaining silent, he's causing more of his own problem for himself. But anyway, finally he says, I find no fault with him. And one of the things I thought that was interesting is that during this scenario, when he's before, remember when Jesus was before Caiaphas and Annas, and they were trying to bring all these false accusations and whatnot, and there was a lot of inconsistencies and so forth. And they recognized that they really had no legitimate reason to condemn him. Remember, I think last week we talked about the fact that there was this fury, that erupted, and they were going to actually kill Jesus right there, the crowd, the mob. And the soldiers stepped in to save him. The same thing happens again when he's before Pilate and Herod. The mob gets stirred up, right, to the point where they're going to just rip him, tear him apart before he's ever condemned as a. I thought that was interesting. In other words, a couple of times before he actually goes to the cross, he could have been murdered. But this has to be an offering. In other words, Jesus cannot allow, God cannot allow his life to be taken. It has to be a voluntary offering, right? And so that's important. But there are several situations here. Of course, during his ministry, we know, but then even when he's arrested, he's going to be killed or murdered right there, and that's prevented. It says here, when Pilate said, "I find no fault at all," it says, "These words from a heathen judge were a scathing rebuke to the perfidy and falsehood of the rulers of Israel who were accusing the Savior. As the priests and elders heard this from Pilate, their disappointment and rage knew no bounds. They had long plotted and waited for this opportunity. As they saw the prospect of the release of Jesus, they seemed ready to tear him in pieces. They loudly denounced Pilate and threatened him with the censure of the Roman government. They accused him of refusing to condemn Jesus, who they affirmed had set himself up against Caesar." So, again, this rage and this hatred began to develop, where actually his life is at risk here. Pilate this time had no thought of condemning Jesus. He knew that the Jews had accused him through hatred and prejudice. He knew what his duty was. Justice demanded that Christ should be immediately released. But that didn't happen, did it? It didn't happen. So, when you read through this chapter here, it's astounding at the parallels that you can see with the interaction between church and state today, or what it eventually will be and what it was back then. So, let's see. Who can we get to read verses 27 to 31? Are you want to read
I'm
it?
the only one left.
Well, go, baby.
Which one is it?
27 to 31.
Okay. Then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the
Unto the praetorium.
praetorium, gathered the whole garrison around him, and they stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him. When they had twisted a crown of thorns, they put it on his head and a reed in his right hand, and they bowed the knee before him and mocked him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" Then they spit on him, and took the reed and struck him on the head. And when they had mocked him, they took the robe off him, put his own clothes on him, and led him away to be crucified. Now, as they came
That's
out,
good.
okay,
That's good. All right, so I just want you to see here that the after all this phony stuff is going on, and Pilate kind of washes his hands of the situation, so to speak, right? Even though it didn't go well for him afterwards. The state machine starts to kick in. In other words, the mechanism of an enforcement of the state begins to kick in. You know, the law enforcement and the attitude that the secular government has to try to control situations like this, because I mean this was a very potentially explosive scenario where the people could have erupted, and of course the Romans were trying to control, all this kind of mob mentality thing. And so what they do is they treat Jesus immediately like a criminal,
well,
like any other criminal. And so they began to do things that actually they step over the line even in their treatment of this now person that they think is a condemned criminal. And there's a reason though why this is happening. What do you think the reason is?
Well, now these Roman soldiers to start with knew nothing about Christ. I mean, really. The Romans was just cruel people. They looked for ways to extend punishment and make it as painful as possible. To them, he was just a criminal, period. They couldn't care less who he was or what he was. But they was going by what everybody said. Oh, the king of the Jews, the king of the Jews. Well, they knew they only had one king.
Is there something satanic also that's happening here?
Sure it is.
Okay. When you get into Desire of
I guarantee you
Ages,
Satan was in the crowd stirring up all the people and
Exactly.
his own self.
right? And what's he trying to do?
Causes much pain and
And why is he trying to do that?
Because he had to.
Well, and he's trying to probably kill him prematurely.
He's trying to.
No, he's trying to kill him, but not necessarily prematurely.
He's
But
trying.
he's going to kill him.
He's trying to break his resolve. And what do I mean by that?
So he'll reveal his divine power and like,
Right.
okay, I'm done with this, you guys.
Right. He's trying to break his resolve. So cause as much pain and aggravation as possible, so that finally Jesus just says,
I've had enough.
I'm done with this, you know. Because even the people that are causing the pain, the Roman soldiers who you say were cruel and unconverted and whatnot, he's there to save them too. He's their savior too,
Sure.
right? And so he's trying to break his resolve. And that's why Jesus is going through all this. And he has to allow himself to go through all this to get to the place and get to the time where he will voluntarily yield up his life an offering as the Passover lamb. And of course, everybody else that's involved here knows nothing of the timing, knows nothing of the circumstance, knows nothing of the heavenly script that's been written. Jesus is on his own here. I mean, he is trotting, as they say, trotting the winepress alone. He's the only one that really knows what's going on. You know? And it's just amazing that he wasn't killed prior to getting to. I mean, in my opinion, you know, God had to preserve him all
God
along the
could
way.
never have allowed it.
I mean, he could have been killed numerous times before he ever got to Calvary.
He could have died in the garden,
Exactly. Yeah.
but God
So-
could not allow that.
So
I'm guessing.
now, the same scenario on a global scale is playing out with the 144,000. The 144,000 have been called, they've been chosen, they're part of the end time script, the scenario, the heavenly script. Many times before probationary time closes, they probably could have been killed off. The 144,000, the remnant, will find themselves in many similar circumstances where they probably believe their life was going to end. There's no reason for them to have survived, is what I'm saying. And yet they're going to find themselves, after probation closes, as being the ones left, the representatives, if you will, that will live on and never taste death. You see. And so you have, in a sense, a microcosm here at Calvary, or here at these trials and this tribulation that they're going through. You have a microcosm of the trumpets and the last, well, basically the trumpets that are playing out.
I believe not only was this that Christ went through this and everything to save us, but I also believe he went through this to say, hey, look, this is what, he even said it, this is what's going to happen to you.
John exposes more of the detail
Right.
of the expectation on a global scale of what really Christ went through.
And this is
His
exactly
Passion
what you can
Weekend.
expect.
His Passion Weekend really becomes just a microcosm of what God's people will go through at the end.
Okay, now that we know what we're facing, does Christ's death make it any easier for us to go through
And
it?
who are the players involved?
Us.
No,
The
I mean, who are the
144,000.
players involved here in concerning what Jesus is going through? The church and the
The
state.
state.
The church and the state. And then them kind of coming together to condemn Christ. Okay? Same thing at the end. We have the church and the state coming together to condemn the remnant. Right?
The church having power over the state.
Right. Right. And the mechanism that they use to have that power is the mob mentality and the rioting and all that. So, in other words, if you can hold up, if you can use the people, if you can use the common people as the leverage to control the government, then you infiltrate, you influence, or even pay them. Because many of the things that we see going on today are people that are paid. They're bussed in. They're being paid, $15 an hour to go in and cause nonsense. And you're going to find lots of people out there that don't mind raising some hell, in a sense, for $15 an hour. Get dressed up like a, or whatever, and go in and just start causing problems. And so it's basically the same thing. We're starting to see those things play out, aren't we? Very similar to
But
society.
is it going to make it any easier for us in the end times when we're looking at this and we look back at what Christ went through?
Yeah.
The only assurance we have is that we're going to make it.
Yeah, so we're just seeing, again, in these scriptural accounts here, we're seeing really where it becomes relevant to us is we're seeing that what happened to him, what he went through in his week of passion, is similar to what the true believers will go through at the end. Now, obviously, quote, the church, right, is out there telling people, one thing that they're telling people is that you won't go through any of this. You see, that's the detrimental thing about the, quote, the secret rapture theory. You're gonna be whisked away, and you're not going to go through any of this. And that really does not follow the context here of Scripture, where God's people will have a Gethsemane experience. They will face a lot of this same nonsense that Jesus faced in his weekend of passion. And of course, the result will be somewhat different in that our lives will be preserved because he gave his life, right? Because he became the substitute, our lives will be preserved, right? And so that's the demarcation there where it becomes extremely beneficial for us. But that doesn't mean we're not going to experience a lot of the abuse along the way, because Satan is trying to do the same thing. He's trying to break our resolve, right?
And he hates us.
Right. He's trying to break our resolve. And so it's only through the Spirit of God that we will be enabled to live through the things that will come, the time of trouble that will come on this planet to God's people. And we're just seeing in this a microcosm as we go through Matthew here. But we'll go ahead and finish up the chapter next week, where Jesus actually goes to the cross. And we'll definitely finish that up next week. And we'll see, maybe even get into chapter 28 and finish up the book of Matthew. And as we've gone through this book of Matthew, we can honestly say that we've only caught one perspective of the four Gospels, but in the other Gospels, they present things that are very similar. And so after we get done with Matthew, we'll go ahead and move back into the book of Revelation. So, all right? Sound good?
Sounds great.
Yeah, Elijah, can I have you close us in prayer this morning?
Lord, thank you so much for this Sabbath day and for this time that you've allowed us to study your word together. And thank you for the blessings of the things that you have kept in there for us, that we can read and understand and prepare ourselves for the future, as you have promised that you would not leave us in the dark. And we thank you so much for the things that your Son did. He was willing to go through all this pain and suffering for us so that we could have redemption through him. And Lord, as we continue to read and study, please continue to impress us with his truth and his knowledge so that we can share it with others, and not only share it but apply it to our own lives, so that we can become not only hearers of the word but doers as well. We thank you so much for our fellowship time together, and ask that you continue to bless us as we eat and enjoy this time together for the rest of the Sabbath days. This is our prayer in your Son's name. Amen.
Okay, well, guys, thank you so much for your comments. I hope that my stuffy head wasn't too distracting. And great to have you joining us as well. We hope that you come back again for our study time at homechurch.us. We'll see you next week. Have a great week.